Hey guys, hope you guys are doing well tonight. I'm super excited to be able to, join you again, you could say, even though I'm not actually there, obviously, but excited to be able to share God's word with you. Always thankful and privileged for the opportunity, and been looking forward to it. I'm excited about the lesson that I get to share today, and I know it's something that's impacted my life, and so that's why I'm super excited to be able to share it with you. And so with that kind of leading into it, I've got a question. We're going to go somewhere with this, so kind of follow me a little bit. But how many of you guys like chocolate? I know personally, chocolate is one of my favorite things. Growing up, my dad loved chocolate. He's the kind of person that he'll walk into Dairy Queen, and if he's going to get ice cream, he's going to get whatever has the most chocolate with chocolate ice cream, chocolate sauce, chocolate everything, and not think twice about it. I'm sure there's probably a couple of you guys like that. Personally, I'm not sure if I love chocolate quite that much, but I sure enjoy it. It's one of my favorite things in the world. And I've got an illustration I want to use with chocolate, which is why I kind of started us off with that. How many of you guys, in liking chocolate, like the original, like the Hershey chocolate bars? That's probably one of my favorites. I feel like it's just kind of pure, simple chocolate. It's hard to beat. And I can remember growing up, my Sunday school teacher would always bring us Hershey bars like that. And if we memorized a verse, we got a Hershey bar. And it was always a big deal to me growing up in 4th and 5th grade. And I still remember back on it today and still love those Hershey bars. But does anybody know when the first Hershey bar was sold? The first Hershey bar was sold right around early 1900s. And according to Hershey's, let's see, looking at here, was Hershey chocolate bars are Hershey's second most popular brand after the Reese's. And I can agree with that. Reese's are definitely top tier. They're the third most consumed confection in the United States. The Hershey's website reports that it has 6 chocolate factories in the United States and at least 1 in 10 other countries. It's also reported that Hershey bars posted more than $1.6 billion with a B in sales in 2020. That's a lot of chocolate. That's a lot of chocolate bars, and that's a lot of happy people, if we're being totally honest. Hershey bars are named, though, after Milton S. Hershey, who started the Hershey Chocolate Company, and they produced a lot of wonderful things. But what was he like? Tonight we're going to be looking at generosity, and Milton Hershey, I think, is someone that here outside of the Bible, and we'll look at some biblical examples, but he was an example of someone who was very generous. He didn't just use chocolate bars to line his pockets financially and just provide for himself. Listen to this quote from the Hershey website. It says, in addition to leaving us with America's most iconic chocolate bar, Milton S. Hershey left behind a legacy of goodness. It's a story of persistence, spirit, compassion, selflessness, and purpose. His spirit has never faltered, nor has it ever failed to inspire us. Milton Hershey was a man who taught us that business is a matter of service. That generosity leads to the richest of rewards. And that's one happiness that is dependent on the joy of others. Listen again to that quote about Milton Hershey. Milton Hershey, quote, taught us business is a matter of service, that generosity leads to the richest of rewards, and that one's happiness is dependent on the joy of others. Milton Hershey was indeed, he was a wealthy businessman. He loved making candy, but more importantly than that, he was a man who loved seeing joy brought into the lives of others. And now you're saying, well, of course, anyone who makes chocolate brings joy into my life. And I'd agree with you. He did a great job. But even more so outside of just introducing us to some of the best chocolate in the world, his generosity and his love for other people was on clear display. And then November 15th, 1909, Milton Hershey and his wife opened a home and school for orphans and low-income families. It became known as the Milton Hershey School. This school still enrolls students today. The Hersheys put others before themselves. Even though they could have bought anything they wanted with this money, they chose to invest it in children who needed it and in other people and in training the next generation. Tonight's lesson is the second part of a 4-part series called No Filter, Keeping It Real. This series is designed to help us focus on the basics of how to live the Christian life and how our lives can clearly and boldly demonstrate our relationship with Jesus. One way to keep it real in the Christian life is to live a generous life. Generosity is as real as you can be. Generosity is showing love to other people. And a lot of times when we think of generosity, it's very easy to think of giving money, right? We look at Milton Hershey, and through his money, he provided for people. And you might be sitting there saying, hey, like, I don't have that much money, Josh. And I get you. I'm a college student here. Why not? College students are known for having the most money in the world. And I'm definitely one of those that is known for not having the most money in the world. But yet, one thing we're going to look at tonight, one thing I want you guys to grasp onto, is the fact that generous living is more than just financial giving. Giving financially is definitely a part of generosity, absolutely, but yet living a life of generosity and having a mindset of generosity is so much more than just wondering about what you can give financially and looking at giving financially. So let's look at what it talks about and what it means to live generously. So our first point is generous living. You might be like, well, no, duh. Well, let's dive into it a little bit. If you have your Bibles, we're going to jump into 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. Not John 3:16, 1 John 3:16. And we're going to read verse 16 down through verse number 18. I'm going to grab my Bible here and flipped over to the right page. 1 John 3:16 through 18, it says, hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoso hath this world's good, whosoever hath this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And guys, you might be looking and saying, well, where does generosity tie into that? I didn't see the word generosity or anything in there that talked necessarily about being generous. But while our minds go to this act of giving, we're going to define generosity as a readiness or a liberality in giving. It's not just about giving, but about mindset. And that's what these verses talk all about, is a mindset of generosity. You don't have to be rich, as I said before, to be able to be a generous person. And we're going to dive in here and look at it. So what we're going to see in this verse is kind of subpoint A here, generosity's model. We're going to see it modeled. Now, as we read these verses, verse 16, it talks about, it says that he laid down his life. Now, who do we think he is talking about here? Most of you guys are probably sitting there saying the answer in your head. It's Christ. Christ is our model of generosity. And when we look at it, you said, hey, again, this verse doesn't use generous. How can we say Christ is a model of that if it doesn't even talk about generosity? And we don't see that word used here in this passage. Guys, this verse tells us that we can know what love is when we see someone laying down their lives for someone else. Love is at the very heart of generosity. Generosity is almost like an outgrowth of love. Love is at its core. Generosity is an outpouring of the love that we have for other people. That's what generous living is all about. It's about loving other people. Loving is putting someone else before us, putting their needs before our own, not thinking about myself, but thinking about others and how I can be a blessing to them by the little things that I do. Jesus is our greatest example of generous living. As we look at Jesus and his time on earth, his generosity was not marked by the money that he gave to the poor or by some program that he ran that just took care of everybody. He lived generously by putting the needs of others before his own. He took time with his disciples. He took time with the sick. He took time to care for and minister to the little children. He took time to reach out to the crowds of people that followed him, even when he was weary and tired. He was consistently taking the time to put the needs of others before his own needs. His most generous act of all was when he gave his life for us by dying on the cross. He gave his very life for the life of others. The Bible tells us that greater love hath no man than this, than that a man lay down his life for his friends. The greatest display of love that can be shown is the giving of one's own life for the life of others. But yet, we think of giving your own life. We think of that final moment of, hey, it's like dying for somebody, right? You take a bullet for somebody. We think of what Christ sacrifices for us. Giving our life is even more than that. Giving your time is giving your life. Time is something we can never gain back. But yet when we give somebody our time, we are giving them pieces of our life each and every day. And that's one thing that we can look at as part of Christ's example in generous giving. Christ had a readiness to give. No one ever had to try to talk him into giving his time or caring for somebody. In fact, Christ went and found people that he could give his life to and give his time to and care for them in that way. Let's look at 1 John 3:16 again. The second half of this verse is a challenge to followers of Christ. And we're going to look at that. Let me grab my Bible here. Second half, it says, he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. It says, hey, this is our model, as we're talking about, the model of generosity. Just as Christ laid down his life for us, we're called to lay down our life for others and follow his example. So again, living generously is much more than financial giving. It involves our entire life, not just our money. But why would anyone do this? Well, why should I? Why? It's easy for me to just keep things for myself and use my time for myself and use the money I have for myself and use my things for myself. And it absolutely is. That's our human nature and what we want to do. So what must our motivation be to be able to live generously? Well, I'm glad you asked. Generosity, number 2, so subpoint 2 here, generosity is mindset and motivation. We're going to kind of group these two in together, so you can make it 3 points if you feel so led. But we're going to look at these together in the mindset and motivation of it. Now, we're going to look at 1 John 3, verse 17. It says, but whoso hath this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? On the surface, you might think this verse is saying the obvious. If you have plenty of food, if you have plenty of food and someone doesn't have food, we should give them food, right? We say, hey, well, that makes sense. That's being a decent human being, right? Even someone that's not a Christian would say, absolutely, that's the right thing to do. And this element of general living is one that's perhaps most often thought of before anything else. It's providing for someone else. But it's the very end of this verse that I want us to kind of home in on, because by not having a loving, generous mindset and attitude, it's difficult, I dare say impossible, to show the love of God to those that need to see it. As we look at this, if the love of God abides in a person, well, we see it cannot abide in a person that chooses not to be generous. God's love abiding in us is going to cause us to be generous. We used the example earlier of having a Hershey's chocolate bar. And another thing I think of when I think of Hershey's chocolate bar is s'mores. Nothing to me is a summer night like having a campfire, marshmallows, graham crackers, Hershey's chocolate, put together a nice fat s'more and eat it. There's nothing else I'd rather do a lot of nights in the summertime. But yeah, if we think about it, let's say that if I was there with you guys and we all decided we were going to go out and have a campfire, and different ones of us were responsible to bring different items, and we get there and we realize that whoever was responsible to bring the Hershey bars totally forgot. Now, could we enjoy just eating marshmallows and graham crackers? Certainly, but it's not the same without the Hershey bar and making a s'more. Now, what if I knew that in my vehicle, I had plenty of Hershey bars for everybody? But it wasn't my responsibility to bring them. They're ones that I had for me. I was going to use them later on when I met with other people to do s'mores, or maybe I was just going to eat them all by myself when I got home tonight. Now, knowing that I have these, what are my options? You might be like, well, this seems really obvious, but let's think about it. There's 4 different things that one could do when we're in a position to be generous. And so let's look at how we could respond. Number 1, I could just keep my bag of chocolates. In all honesty, it's mine. I paid for it. I wasn't the one that was supposed to bring it. I just happened to have it. There's no reason that I have to share anything that's mine with anybody else, right? We could justify it that way. Secondly, I could give y'all part of the chocolate out of guilt and obligation. I could go to my car and maybe grab a few, enough to get by. Everybody have a little bit, maybe half a s'more per person with a little bit of chocolate. And that would probably help me and not feel guilty afterwards, right? Because I could say, yeah, at least I gave them a little bit, but yet it wouldn't be giving and being generous. I could sell you my chocolate bars. I could go to the person that was supposed to bring them and be like, hey, you were supposed to bring these, and since you forgot, to save you from embarrassment, you can buy these off of me. I'll sell you my Hershey's for $20, and I could take advantage of the situation that they found themselves in and help them save face, but actually it's just benefiting to me and hurting them. And that wouldn't be the kindest thing to do. And then fourthly, this is probably the option you've all been thinking about the whole time. I could give my Hershey bars. And this would be an example of 1 John 3:17. It's giving selflessly. It's giving our all, our everything. And obviously, if we all got together for s'mores, I'd be more than happy to share. I'd like to think I would be, at least. I do get a little clingy with chocolate, but I think I'd be happy to share my Hershey bars with everybody, that way we could all enjoy having some s'mores together and have some fellowship around those. And so following this, we all know intuitively out of those 4 options what the generous option would be. We wouldn't take a rocket scientist. This was a multiple choice quiz question. I have no doubt that 100% of us would be like, yeah, that's absolutely how we're supposed to do it. It's how you're supposed to give. And so it's easy to remember it, but sometimes it's so much harder to live out each and every day. We have to live in that mindset of, I want to be generous and give all that I have and all that I can to help meet the needs of others and help encourage and support others. Now, secondly, we're going to look at two other examples of generous living that we find in the Bible. And a couple of these are some of my favorite Bible characters, and especially the second one. We don't even know their name, but I don't want to ruin it ahead of time, so we'll get there when we get there. But we talked about Milton Hershey as a 20th century example of displaying generosity and of showing generosity to others, even those that you could look and say they didn't deserve it, they didn't do anything for him, and that's exactly right in generosity. But we're going to look, and we talked about 1 John 3:18, we read it, I'm going to read it again. It says, "My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and truth." Generosity starts with a mindset, but then it's shown in each of our actions. Milton Hershey didn't just talk about giving money to orphans or to starting a school. He didn't just talk about it. He didn't just give money. They took action and started a school for low-income families, and they worked to meet the needs that they saw in their community and in the lives of those around them. As we look at these two examples, the first thing we're going to look at is a woman with a skill. We're going to look at someone that gave their skill to the Lord. We know that God gives us different talents and abilities, and we're going to look at this particular lady. You may have heard the story before, but her name is Tabitha, and we're going to find that story if you turn over to the book of Acts, and it's going to be here in chapter 9, verse number 36. We're going to read down to verse 40. It says, "Now there was at Joppa a certain disciple named Tabitha, which by interpretation is called Dorcas. This woman was full of good works and alms deeds, which she did. And it came to pass in those days that she was sick and died, whom when they had washed, laid her in an upper chamber. And forasmuch as Lydia was nigh to Joppa, the disciples heard that Peter was there. They sent unto him 2 men, desiring that he would not delay to come to them. Then Peter arose and went with them. And when he was come, they brought him to the upper chamber. And all the widows stood by him weeping, and showing the coats and garments which Dorcas made while she was with them. But Peter put them all forth, and knelt down and prayed, and turning him to the body, and said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes when she saw Peter, and sat up." As we look at this story of Tabitha, we see that it tells us in verse 36, she was a woman who was marked by giving and alms deeds and generosity, exactly what we've been talking about here today. She used her skills in sewing to make garments for the widows. She cared for these people that could not care for themselves. And that skill for her, it ultimately ended up resulting in a love between her and the other disciples. And we see that even Peter stepped in and raised her from the dead after she had passed away. And then she continues on in that ministry. She was a woman who used the skills and talents that she had. We don't know her financial situation. We just know that she was willing to use the abilities that she had to be a blessing to those around her. The second one we're going to see, which is my favorite, is the boy with the lunch. Now you may be saying, oh, I know where you're going with this, and you're probably right. We're going to turn over to John chapter 6. We're going to read verses 8 through 12. And it says, "One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him," him being Jesus, "There is a lad here, which hath 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many?" And Jesus said, "Make the men sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, and the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves when he had given thanks, and distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them which were sat down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. And they were filled. He said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost." Guys, we don't even know the name of this little boy, the lad with the lunch. That's all we know him as. He was this young boy, and we don't know exactly how old he was. It's indicated here that he was a child, not very old, and maybe he just came because he was curious about the crowd of people, and his mom might have packed him that lunch that morning and sent him along his way. But yet, he didn't have to give his lunch for Jesus. He could have kept it for himself. He could have offered to sell it to the disciples in exchange for money or seeing Jesus or seeing a miracle. But no, we see that this boy willingly comes to a disciple and offers up his lunch for Jesus. This young man demonstrated, my video clipped out, so we'll put this together. But as we're looking at the story of this disciple, not the disciple, but the boy that gave to the disciples, we see that he didn't have to give this anything. He came and willingly gave this lunch to Christ. This is something that any of us can do. Any of us can give what we have. It wasn't anything special. It was 5 small loaves and 2 small fishes that he had brought for his lunch, but yet he was willing to give this to the Lord. Potentially, thousands of other people could have had nothing to eat that day if this boy hadn't been willing to give what he had. They also would not have seen Jesus perform the miracle, and we would have never known who this little boy was, except for this action of generosity that he took and the step that he made in giving his lunch to Jesus to be used. So, jumping back to our 20th century illustration, how would the town of Hershey, Pennsylvania be different if the Miltons had never opened their school or helped the orphans or treated employees fairly? What if he had kept all the profits to themselves? I dare say that God would not have blessed their business as he did. You look at businesses such as the Hershey Chocolate Company. You look at Chick-fil-A, run by Truett Cathy, a very generous man. Still, even though he's passed away, his company is supporting their employees, some of them to get through college and helping them out that way and pouring into the community and holding to these standards of generosity and of love to others. Now, we looked at Jesus and we asked, what if Jesus hadn't had the generosity and the love to lay down his life for each of us? When we look at it that way, it makes it clear just how important it is to live generously. So the question remains, how can we impact the world through our generosity? Who can you make a difference in by being generous and giving your time, your attention? Maybe it's something with money, maybe it's grabbing someone a coffee. There's little things you can do like that out of generosity. Sometimes it's just taking time with somebody and giving them a portion of your life and giving them time and encouragement and investing in them. So young people, I challenge you tonight. This is an awesome lesson to be able to learn from and begin building as early as you can in your life, becoming a person who is marked by this attribute of generosity. Generosity is so much more than just financial giving. It's a mindset. It's a mindset that motivates us to take action and to live this out for the Lord. So take some time, maybe think about areas of your life that you can grow in the area of generosity, or maybe there's something right now you're thinking about that, hey, I need to do something for this person, or I could help them out with this, fill in the blank. But I challenge you this week, find somebody that you can take time and be generous to and watch the difference that God can use you to make. I'm glad I was able to join you guys again tonight. And I look forward to hopefully getting to do this again here in the future. If there's anything that I can ever do for you, feel free to touch base with me, and you probably don't have my number, so feel free to go through Elijah. I live in a room right next to him, so I'm not too hard to find. It's pretty easy for me to catch up with him. But I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday and a great week.